and welcome back to Mads World. I'm your host Mads, and I hope you've been enjoying the show so far. If you have, please remember to subscribe, rate and review the podcast on your favourite listening platform, and follow me on Instagram. It's at madsworld.mp3. In this episode, I am joined by British social impact entrepreneur Sara-Louise Ackrill. Sara is a practicing therapist with a business background and was diagnosed with autism at the age of 38. She has since founded Wired Differently, a creative hub with products and services for neurodivergent people to help support them during the coronavirus pandemic in 2020. Wired Differently is powered by neurodiversity for neurodivergent people. You might be wondering what I mean by neurodivergent. Sara summarises the term well on her website, saying, Judy Singer, an Australian sociologist, coined the term neurodiversity in the late 90s. It's used to refer to people with autism spectrum disorder and what used to be called Asperger's, ADHD, and specific learning difficulties such as dyslexia. 1 in 7 people, or 15% of the UK population, are neurodivergent. Specifically, 1 out of 100 meet criteria for autism and 5 out of 100 meet criteria for ADHD. People with these lifelong conditions tend to struggle socially, at home, school, in the workplace, and in their relationships. But where the medical model looks for a cure for a problem, the social model of neurodiversity acknowledges the qualities of neurodivergent people and proposes that if society would only accommodate people with different neurological makeup, then neurodivergent people would thrive. Up next, I chat with Sara on how dating, sex and relationships look for autistic people, including typical assumptions, challenges, ideas, sensory needs and sexuality. Please note that we couldn't possibly speak on behalf of all neurodivergent people, and this chat is based on Sara's personal experience. Hi Sara, how are you?
Hi, I'm very excited to be doing this. Of all the topics, this is the one that I'd like to be talking about, I think.
I am so excited to have you on the podcast. So you are the founder of Wired Differently. So first up, could you tell me and our listeners a little bit more about the organisation and the work you do here?
Yeah, of course. So at the base of things, I'm a therapist. I'm a bit of an eclectic therapist with an unusual background. So I work with people who are neurodivergent, and I'm also autistic with ADHD myself. I have 8 different projects. One of them is public speaking, but I also work across, I have an app in development. There's also a clothing range in development. And then there's various writing projects, training, and writing training too. So, and on top of that, I have 20 or thereabouts coaching clients. So it's pretty busy.
So alongside all of that and your social entrepreneurship and your therapy and your coaching, you also mentioned to me that you are currently writing an ebook on what dating and relationships look like for neurodivergent people. So is there anything you can share with us about that and how that is going to look or come together?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been writing something called How to Stop Hurting, Doing Life as a Neurodivergent Woman for many, many years, actually. But it's in the last 12 months that I decided that I would have a very significant part of that to do with dating, which obviously then impacts on things like intimacy, body image, sexuality, gender, eating disorders and disordered eating. It's interconnected, isn't it, with everything else that we do?
Yeah.
And sex is, of course, all about our life energy, and that is behind literally everything. So even how we spend money, addiction, how we seek fusion, and we're sensation-seeking people generally on the spectrum, or especially on the ADHD side. So it's becoming it's a bit of a life book, actually.
Yeah. Oh, it sounds incredible. I think once it gets released, I'll have to link it to everybody who listens to and supports the podcast. So if you're looking forward to reading that, don't worry, I will make sure it reaches everybody listening. So I've asked you on the podcast today to chat about these sort of themes, and I've divided our discussion into dating, relationships, sex, and support. So obviously you can't speak for every neurodivergent person out there, as everyone's experiences are so unique, but
very true.
I'm really looking forward to hearing your insights as an autistic person. So just to kick us off, I'd like to start talking about dating. So how do you personally select which people to date, and how do you go about meeting people?
Okay, well, like everyone else, I've got little choice in the matter. It's very online, isn't it? That's how things are. I also work with collaborators, but pretty much alone, and I work from home. So the old days of meeting someone in an office or at a drinks party after work have kind of dried up for us, haven't they? How do I go about selecting people? Basically, I look for someone who gets it, whether they know somebody who is neurodivergent, or they have children who are neurodivergent, or they are themselves neurodivergent. I have to say this is recent, because I always thought it wouldn't matter, and I've come to realize over the last 12 months, to me personally, it very much matters. And I would say the people I know, including my clients who are in stable relationships, they are with somebody who somehow gets it for a tangible reason. I think you can be open-minded and understanding, but still have no idea what neurodiversity means. And I think it can massively impact not only us, but our partners. And so for that reason, personally now, I'm choosing to try and date, people who are neurodivergent. I mean, I am not in a regular relationship. I am dating openly at the moment. So yeah. So for marriage advice, you may need a different podcast.
Well, don't worry. This podcast is definitely all about dating usually. So when you said in the last 12 months, is there something particular that has led that decision, or has it been related to the pandemic? Or, I mean, obviously you don't have to share if it's completely personal, but is there something that sort of guided that way of thinking?
Yeah. I would say that, so there's something that we do when we're on the spectrum, and that, well, there's many, many quirky things that we do. One of them is we jump into relationships too quickly because we don't like the uncertainty of dating. And the other is we can fill in the blanks about people because, again, we don't like uncertainty, and we can really convince ourselves we know somebody very well when we don't. And that actually was really brought home to me during the pandemic when I was building relationship on WhatsApp with someone, and I realized at the end of the pandemic that I knew nearly nothing about them, but I'd given them my emotions and my loyalty and my emotional investment without actually particularly getting anything back, and that is not necessarily the fault of that person. It's the situation, and it just brought home to me, actually, neurodivergent people do this filling in the blanks thing all the time, but it really highlighted it during the pandemic when most people could only get to know someone online.
So what assumptions might people make about dating an autistic person?
Wow, that's a really good question. I just want to be clear on the level of crassness that we get leveled at us through total ignorance and naivety, and nothing particularly badly intentioned, but I have, in the last few months alone, been told I look too nice to be autistic. I look pretty in my dress. I'm at a sort of cocktail party. You're so sociable. You're so confident. Don't put yourself down. Why do you have to label yourself with something? Surely we all get nervous. And I think the stereotype seems to be that we all have social anxiety, or that autism is anxiety. Many, many people say you don't look autistic, which is something that lots of autistic people get leveled at them. And it's funny in our community as to the answers that we've learned to come out with over the years, because, I mean, what a thing to say to someone.
Yeah.
I think that there's the problem that autism and ADHD are hidden disabilities or hidden conditions. Not everyone relates to it as a disability. I do, as it happens, but I think the problem is that we make the assumption that other disabilities are not hidden, and actually, I would say most disabilities are hidden. You can't look at someone because, even if they're in a wheelchair, even if they're walking with a stick, even if they've got their arm in a sling, you still don't know what happened or what they struggle with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you see what I mean? So so definitely. We have to get through a certain level of crassness. And I think that people, the other week I was chatting to someone online, and it shut down completely when he said, I said to him, you do realize I'm autistic, right? Is that okay? And I think a lot of the time people haven't read your profile anyway, if I'm honest. I think it's very picture-based, which is a big problem, and you feel really invalidated. But this chap actually said to me, oh, well, I'm sure that doesn't affect you that much, otherwise you wouldn't be on something like this. And I was like, I'm really sorry, I just can't go any further with this conversation.
Yeah, it's just like there's no depth to that. It's sort of, he's just brushed over it when you've completely opened up to him type thing.
Yeah, and this is the assumption. If you were that bad, quote unquote, you wouldn't be here. Yeah. I mean, that is kind of the underlying thought.
Oh, Christ. And how quickly do you disclose that you have autism to someone on a dating app, or do you just go in straight away?
Do you know something? I actually now have it on my dating profile. I'm not saying I would advise that to people, but I would say make reference to how you are, in inverted commas. And then it's for the other person to pick up on that. And I have to say, I have never met so many nice people who I really get on with. I'm not saying that everyone you meet you're going to want something romantic with, or that you're going to be equally keen on everyone. But I have never met so many nice people who get me and who I get, and who are so genuine and so interesting, and had so many very compatible dates. That's been really enjoyable this year.
Is that through dating apps?
Yeah, through dating apps, yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it is. And I think since my lockdown experience, it just hit me so hard that I was essentially dating myself. And that the other person was not what I had made them out to be. Not necessarily good or bad, but I just knew so little about them. That was what was painful at the end of the 15, 16-month experience. I just sort of realized I've been dating myself. I actually know very little about this person. Everything that I've got out of this, I've put in, and I might as well have been talking to myself for 16 months. And I think when someone's not ready for a relationship, it's easy for them to do that online, because they don't have to feel particularly ready in order to just chat with someone, and then you're under the impression they're super available.
And I guess it can go one of two ways with online dating, in that you give too much too soon, especially in something like the pandemic, and you get to know each other too well before you meet, or it can kind of go the other way. That could be a positive thing or a negative thing, if you know what I mean.
Or you feel you know them. I mean, how many times, we've all done this, I think, how many times have you had a WhatsApp on your darkest day and someone says something mildly amusing and you've replied with the crying, laughing emoji. And you're there in your PJs, 4 PM, eating crisps, feeling crap. You would not be getting out and going to a bar, and you're disproportionately overreacting to something which was pretty normal, with the crying emoji, laughing your head off,
Stone face,
and it's actually so easily done. But if you had to get dressed and go and meet that person, you probably wouldn't be sitting there crying, laughing. So you can literally give off emotions you're not having, and you're connecting with people who aren't necessarily feeling it. And it's just made me very aware of our internal lives and our external lives not always being in sync. And I don't want to tolerate that anymore.
I think the pandemic has taught us so much about the way, like what we tolerate, like the people we speak to, the people who mean a lot in our lives and who you let in. And I think before that, it was sort of blurred lines, like you'd chat to whoever, but we became really conscious of our time and where it was spent in the last couple of years, I think.
That's very true, yeah.
So what would you like neurotypical people to know about dating an autistic person?
So I'd like them to know, the 84% of neurotypicals, I'd like them to know that yes, we are complex, and yes, we can be quite self-absorbed, because we have a lot. If you imagine inside yourself, you're taking in 3 to 5 times more information from your environment at any given time. You've got loads of sensory stuff going on, which means that you're very absorbed with all your senses all the time. Or you're sensory seeking because you're kind of in a state of being hyposensitive rather than hypersensitive. Either way, you're being dictated to by your senses. So that's very absorbing. Then you've got quite a contradictory belief system, whereby we tend to be known as, quite quaint, quite old school, nice old-fashioned values. If you watch something like Love on the Spectrum, which I'm a big fan of.
I love that show.
There's a lot
so
of,
good.
I love that show. There's a lot of, I want Jodie's job. I'm just putting it out there, but I want that job. But basically, if you think about the fact that we're known as being quaint and old school, I have a friend who calls me Jane Austen. She says I'm like something out of a novel. But then at the same time, we can be into, not necessarily monogamous relationships. We might be polyamorous. We might be into something like swinging. We might be into something alternative, or into have fetishes. We might be really out there and really not what you expect, and at the same time really kind of prim and proper. I would say to neurotypicals, we're actually not that hard to get to know. You just have to ask us, how things affect us, and be prepared that we can't always articulate it, because it is very complicated internally. And we also have a thing where we have difficulties with our proprioception, which is quite literally knowing where our bodies are in space.
Okay.
And this can actually make us feel very physically unsafe all the time. And we often need stuff that makes us feel safe. So, for example, a lot of us are very attached to things like weighted blankets, which is a blanket that is a 10% of your body weight, kind of anchoring you. Sensory stuff, skin brushing, certain types of food. We have certain comforters. We have our routines. They make us feel safe. We're not rigid. When we are with someone we feel safe with and we've come to trust, we can be witty and light and silly and childlike, but we can be very uptight, very rigid, quite melancholic if we are not able to be ourselves. And the world is not built for us. So every single thing we do, we are seeing through the eyes of people in a minority. And that is not us being oversensitive. That is a reality. So yeah, don't be put off dating someone neurodivergent, because we can be the most loyal, really beautiful people, beautiful community of people. We can enhance. We're very values based. We don't do things because they are what is expected. We do things because we really want to. If we hang out with you, we really want to hang out with you, because we would be so good on our own. We don't get together with people because we're uncomfortable necessarily in our skin. We get together with people because it's even better than being alone. I mean, that is the biggest compliment you can pay someone when you're autistic.
That's lovely. You said something really, really great to me in the lead up to this conversation. So it was something you said about the priority for neurotypical people, the priority for them to know it's about how you feel and not what you look like. And just because you can't see something doesn't mean it doesn't affect you in every aspect of your life in every possible way. So can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, I think this is common to people with all kinds of disabilities that are not obvious, which, as I said, is many of them. There seems to be, this is the thing, another reason I'm so interested in our internal lives versus the ones that we live when we pass our front doors, because what kind of world are we living in where we invalidate somebody to the point where nothing they feel matters because they look fine? And that's just so insulting, I think.
And I think that relates to all kinds of people as well. Like if somebody seems fine, it's just about getting to that next level of depth and understanding of just humans, and understanding that people might have more going on below the surface.
Yeah, this is it. And, I'm always surprised. What is the risk we're taking, really, that someone might lie to us and say they're not okay when they secretly are? Like, what, really? Do we think someone would have the time and the inclination to do that?
That is so true.
It does feel to me often like the biggest thing we're worried about is our egos might get a bashing, that someone leads us on that they're not okay when actually they secretly are.
And I don't think, like, the rarity of that, who would do that?
Exactly. I know.
Yeah.
And the fact that we're so frightened of this just tells me we have a really fragile ego, because really, if that's the worst that can happen to you, then we're okay. Life is good.
So you also touched on their autistic people's sensory needs. And I'm just wondering, I was going to ask you about this later in the support section of the podcast, but I think now that we've we've touched on it now, it'd be good to address. So what are the best ways that people can support a person with autism sensory needs, and how do these need to be recognized and addressed?
Okay, so we have hyper and hyposensitivities, as I've said. So everyone will be very different, but the principle remains the same. We have needs which are not petty. So if I'm used to having a weighted blanket at home and I'm going away, don't expect me to not take it with me because it looks childish that I have a weighted blanket with me. Like, I don't suddenly unvelcro my autism from myself when I pass my front door. It's things like that.
Yeah.
I had a partner who was really bothered by the fact that I put on ear defenders when we went to the airport. We'd had a blazing row before we got to the airport, which made me even more sensitive. And I was feeling pretty psychologically unsafe anyway, because, as I've said, we feel very unsafe a lot of the time. And so my sensitivity, just like when I'm tired or stressed or whatever, it was through the roof, So I had my ear defenders on, and I could see through the whole trip he was just dying of embarrassment and thinking, God, when my parents pick us up the other side, please take those things off your head. I could just feel that was what he was feeling and thinking. But it's kind of weird. It's like behind closed doors, you have strategies, but they have to then leave the house. I mean, I can walk around the supermarket with sunglasses on because the, god-awful lighting in those places. I go to somewhere like Boots and I literally dissociate. It's just like, the amount of meltdowns I've had over the years in Boots is just like insane. And it's the same in offices for people. And it's the same with employers. They also expect us to unvelcro our autism and our neurodiversity from ourselves at the door.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? This is why my company is developing a nationwide network of home working positions, because I'm just so appalled by the way that the working world is going and the fact that it excludes more people than it includes. So to answer your question, it's about just accepting that we have these needs. We're not being babyish. We're not making a point of, hello, I'm autistic here with my headphones on or my blanket. If we have to listen to you while we're scrolling on our phone, don't assume the worst. Some people, it's the only way they can connect to what you're saying is by squeezing putty, scrolling their phone or something at the same time. If you're running a training session or whatever, like, don't assume the worst is something that comes up. Whenever I get asked advice about, dealing with neurodivergent people, as it were, I often come down to just don't expect the worst, or don't think the worst of us. If we're doing something that's bothering you, just say, why are you doing that? Well, because it's comforting me.
And I guess it's just like being empathetic with anyone. Again, it's just ask. If you don't know, just ask. If you don't know, just ask, and also question your ego, because if it's that bothering to you that somebody next to you has headphones on or something, then, and you don't want to be seen with the girl with the ear defenders on or whatever, then, because you think that looks too, I don't know, special school or something, in inverted commas, then, well, I'm sorry, but this is who you've chosen to date. Yeah. Love me, not love my ear defenders is definitely the motto. What is an ear defender? What does it look like?
Ear defenders, they're kind of like, they look like modern day headphones, fortunately, because in the past when everything was tiny, they looked really obvious, but now people generally think I'm listening to music and they're like, oh, what are you listening to? And I'll be like, well, nothing.
Silence.
Yeah. But yeah, they look like really kind of chunky headphones. So nowadays you can pretty much look okay. I guess if the person knows they're related to autism and they're particularly sensitive about sticking out, then it could be more of a thing.
That kind of leads into my next question about challenges. So how does dating differ for autistic people alongside sort of trying to find a level of understanding with that person? What are the other particular challenges that people with autism might face when starting a new relationship or down the track in a developed relationship? Yeah, what are sort of some of the challenges here?
I think on a personal level, we often struggle with the fact that by being autistic and ADHD and having associated conditions, we can feel broken because we've often had life paths where we've had a disproportionate amount of bullying. Here in England, we have something that I know the French always used to call the English disease when I lived there. School bullying is a massive problem here, and even more so for people who are neurodivergent. We take that into our lives and we feel broken. So I'm very lucky in the sense that I'm classed as a social impact entrepreneur. I run a business based off everything that I've ever been through. So it's incredibly cathartic, as well as, doing well and touching people. And I get a lot of messages saying, thank you for setting up Wired differently. Just discovering you, just reading your website has made me feel validated. And that's beautiful. But most people don't get that. Like, they might be neurodivergent, but they might be an accountant, or they might be neurodivergent and, I don't know, run a writing school or hairdressers, or they're not being told and fed back to every 2 minutes on neurodiversity. It's another bit of them that they're wondering whether to mention or not. So I guess for a lot of us, there is shame. There is, well, if people say they can't see it and it doesn't impact them, why should I bother telling them? But then if I don't tell them, they're going to say that I kind of shortchange them one day when I say, well, actually, I'm autistic and this is why I behave in these ways. So I think that on the one hand, we feel pretty broken and we're sort of going to someone saying, oh, I'm a bit broken. Is that okay with you? Which is not a great way of starting a relationship.
Yeah.
So on a personal side, we have to get comfortable with articulating. Do we want to say I'm autistic? Do we want to say I'm neurodivergent? Do we want to say I am autistic? I have autism. I have Asperger's, I have Asperger's. Like, we have to get comfortable with how we're going to say it, when we're going to say it, what it means to us. So we have personal development work to do. But on top of that, there's also a lot of dating happens in restaurants and bars, very noisy environments. A lot of people on the spectrum have eating issues. Personally, eating out has always been a massive thing for me, almost obsessional. I will wake up in the morning and research the next restaurant I'm going to. The other reason that lockdown was hard, we had no restaurants and bars to go to. Someone ever says to me, come for a social walk, I just want to smack them, because it's probably the hardest thing for me to do. There is no structure. At least in a restaurant, I know someone's going to come and say, hi guys, let me get you a menu. And then they're going to come back and take a drinks order. Like, there's a structure.
Yeah, it's very familiar, isn't it? It's the same every time, isn't it?
Every restaurant, it's going to be pretty much the same thing. And I love that. Come for a walk with me. I don't know where this walk is starting, where it's ending, how long we're walking for, what the sensory stuff's going to be on the way.
The stress.
Do I look you in the eye when I'm talking or when you're talking? Because I have to do that a bit, because if I don't, you think I'm weird, even though for me it makes me feel really uncomfortable. So a lot of dating takes place in sensory difficult environments.
And lots of variables as well. Lots of things
lots of variables.
Yeah.
80% of people on the spectrum have a mental health condition such as anxiety, which is because we can't bloody see what we're doing most of the time, because we're so blind to so many things. It is quite literally like somebody blindfolds you and says, go into this strange room, and you keep bashing yourself against the furniture and you get all the redolent bruises, and you're like, oh, that's where that piece of furniture is. Okay, I'll try not to bump into that again. And then you do. Yeah. That is what life feels like when we're autistic. And or at least it does for me. That's how I would describe it. So I think on top of that, a lot of us are sexuality fluid, gender fluid. A lot of us definitely see the person rather than the gender. And not everyone in our community is monogamous, far from it. There's a lot of people who are into swinging, or maybe having a committed relationship with occasional times where you open up to other people. And that is more and more accepted in society, but it's not the norm still, of course. And it's certainly not supported by, a lot of religious practices or things that other people might have come to see as their kind of modus operandi, and their education and what their parents have led them to believe. So there's a lot of conflict there in terms of our values. So, I would say, you can see why this is hard, right, Maddie?
Yeah.
There's a lot going on here. And this is why I'm so happy to be talking about this, because there is no Sex and the City for neurodivergent women. And I would love a strand. Do you see what I mean? I would love there to be a strand of Wired Differently, which is all about sex and relationships. So I'm actually going to be training as an intimacy coach this coming year. That's one of my New Year's resolutions. I've been doing some sex ed with youngsters on the spectrum, because they are far less likely even than anyone else to be getting sex ed. And let's face it, not many people were getting it anyway. and I'm doing a hosted meal and in central London, and the ebook and a workshop which I'm co-hosting with my coach Susan Issa. So so a whole strand of the business is going to be taken up by sex and intimacy and relationships. But yeah, I want this funky. I mean, personally, I would not watch Sex and the City right now. It makes me cringe. But if I think
so
of the me 20 years ago loved it, and I want to have that feeling again. But I'd love to see 3 or 4 ND women. That would just be the coolest. It would be so honest.
Now that you've got all these qualifications and all this work, I think you need to write it. You need to make this show for neurodivergent people.
I don't tell any of my investors that, because they already think that I'm crazy and have way too many projects on the go.
Yeah, they're going to hate me for saying that, because you're like,
I'm not sending this link to anyone.
Oh, God, I can't wait to watch that when it comes out. So what are some date ideas that could be enjoyable for autistic or neurodivergent people? And I guess this is going to be quite a personal choice or personal recommendation for what you like. And I know you mentioned that you liked structure and restaurants because it kind of has that familiarity to it. Is there anything else that you think could be a good recommendation for people?
From where I'm concerned, I think I'm suited to dating. It's very me. I come from a luxury hospitality background in my first career. So I'm fine with all of that. That's the bit I can do. I can do the restaurant. It's when you get a few dates in and you start feeling something for someone or intimacy where that was my challenge. But I would say, as a general rule, doing something where you can be alone together is ideal for many neurodivergent people. So I'll tell you something really sad. My dream is to meet someone who I can just read who I can just read next to. So my dream is to meet someone I can literally just sit there with and read. That is my absolute romantic. Yeah, it's like sod the white dress. I just want to get a book and sit. And I actually had a friend recently who married her partner in Nicaragua, and one of the things that they love doing together is just lying there and reading. And I'm like, that is goals.
Oh my God, that is so goals.
It is, right? And why is that so hard? Like, why can we send someone to the moon and not not meet regularly partners where we can do this?
Seriously, I think you need to just put this in your dating profile and write, I just want someone I can lay next to and read. Don't talk to me, just read next to me.
Well, you're clearly into this too. I think there's a thing here. This is like a fetish, perhaps, but it's just so. I had a friend recently who said to me, "What? You've never found that?" Like, I mean, most of my friends know that I'm obsessed with books, and books make me feel safe. But yeah, I just find it hard to let go because, we have all kinds of quirky stuff going on. So when we're around people, we have this thing. It's a bit like emotional Bluetooth that switches on.
Oh
and
my
it's
God,
constantly
I love
scanning
that.
our environment for threats. Yeah.
It's emotional Bluetooth.
And it's exhausting. Emotional Bluetooth. It is exhausting. So I have a lot of clients who are, because of reasons of finance, living with other people. And actually, if they had the money at the moment, they would live alone, because neurodivergent people, that is pretty advisable a lot of the time. We can make great parents if we're single parents. We can make great partners if we don't have children. Like, balancing all of it is something that a lot of neurodivergent women do, and then get very close to burnout very often because they're balancing multiple roles at once. But for reasons of finance, lots of people are living with people. So our Bluetooth is constantly switched on. Even if they're in the same building, let alone the same room. So we can't switch off. We can't feel safe. We can't relax. So relaxing with someone is like the holy grail.
The holy grail.
So in order to, where you would think it would be a minimum, right? In a relationship, relaxing with someone, you would think that is the bare minimum. That's how sad this is. But, in terms of dating somebody who is on the spectrum, if they can do something together but alone with you, that is like heaven. So, for example, if you go and do galleries and things together, you don't have to look at each other in the eye. You can be side by side. You have a focal point which you're sharing and enjoying together, but it's not necessarily intense. You can play video games together. You can go and see a show where there's less emphasis on maybe conversation throughout the activity. So you could desensitize while you're enjoying the activity, and then maybe debrief afterwards where you're having your social time. you could go and do something that's absorbing, like, I don't know, archery or pigeon shooting or whatever. You could just be together and side by side, but not necessarily this one-on-one. I mean, bless them, but when you look at Love on the Spectrum, what are you doing? You're taking people who are neurodivergent, you're sitting them opposite each other, teaching them how to be neurotypical, how to ape everything. Then they're having burnouts because they didn't know if they performed well enough. It's actually not natural. What that program should have done is had people just go off and do activities together. It would have been a lot more representative of what people on the spectrum need when they're dating. Because also the whole point of it is to get to know someone. Well, this is the thing. I think neurotypicals can learn from that too, because dating is very much dinner and drinks. And as I've said, I'm the first person to love that. But when you really think about it, what are you really seeing of that person having dinner and drinks? Yes, you get to see that they weren't a complete asshole to the waiter. Okay, tick. Yes, you get to see they split the bill and they didn't have to do the macho paying for everything and they didn't have to not pay anything. Like everything was 50-50. Okay, great. But it's very minimal. If you want to spend time with someone and give yourself to that person on an exclusive basis, you're offering up something pretty serious. And how do you do that off the back of dinner and drinks? You literally have seen 5% of that person.
I love going for an activity as like a first date because you can see if it's something like mini golf, you can see if that person, like how they react under pressure, how they do in terms of like competitiveness. Like I love doing something like that. And in somewhere like London, there's so many things you can do. Like you can do axe throwing, you can do golf, you can do a cooking class, you can go and see live music. Like there's so many different things you can do. And I think especially coming out the pandemic, it's just such a fun way to like spend your time, because if you're stuck on a date with someone and you're just having a drink and you're kind of like sitting there and you're a bit bored, of course that's going to be boring with someone you don't know. It's very like a job interview, it's not dating's supposed to be fun. And if it's not fun, like you're not doing something fun, like it's going to be boring no matter what.
It's true. And a lot of my clients will say at some point in their therapy and coaching journeys, you know what, we're the ones that are supposed to have social and communication issues. And yet some of this stuff makes no sense. And we can be so quirky and witty and engaging. We can be great, but we don't play the neurotypical game. But as I said, I don't think a lot of neurotypicals are getting much out of that either.
Yeah, that is so true. It's kind of like when you really step back and look at it and look at the rituals we do and, look at meeting up with a stranger from a dating app and just sitting right in front of them, staring into their eyes and talking about, your family or, what you do as a job. It is such a strange thing, like a strange concept, isn't it? So it is kind of good to take a step back and analyze why we do what we do.
Yeah. And also I did have a friend say to me, my friends have been very useful this year in the sense of pointing stuff out to me that I just hadn't seen about how I was approaching dating. So, because of the sensory stuff, a lot of people on the spectrum so some people hate sex, some people hate being touched. They might be asexual. Some people love sex. They love the sensory stimulation. They can even use it as a coping strategy in the same way as you would drugs or alcohol or overspending. You can use it to relieve tension or anxiety. And also there's that existential thing of being very separate in life and desperately wanting to fuse with someone and just lose yourself in that other person. So we all have that existential stuff. But I think that when it comes to dating, we have to get a lot better at asking the right questions. We have to have our behavior match our intention. So if we're jumping into bed with people, but we want something meaningful, it is not through sex you're going to find out if that person cares about you. It just isn't. It's 100%. Such a naive interpretation, and you can feel that something is super meaningful and actually it's just super sensory.
Yeah. God, I'm learning so much. This is one of my favorite podcasts I've done. I'm really enjoying listening to you.
I'm just really glad to have the chance to say stuff that I hope someone will listen to and go, oh my God, that makes sense. And now I'm going to go out and I'm going to date the way I want to date and I'm going to own who I am. And if people don't like it, then the one that likes it will be there and have more hope, because we can feel really hopeless.
Absolutely. So moving on from dating just into relationships. So apart from finding someone you can read next to, what does a successful romantic relationship look like for an autistic person or a neurodivergent person?
So I think that we're very loyal people. Often we make good team players. So I think seeing things seeing a relationship as a project, protecting what is there at the center, going off and doing your thing and coming back to base and checking in with each other. That mixture of autonomy and bonding would be great. Again, doing the personal development work on ourselves to check in with, where do we need to work on ourselves? Because we do. And unfortunately, how sex therapists, they'll always say, actually, I talk about either a lot of bad sex or stuff that's not related to sex at all, because sex problems and relationship problems are where other stuff surface.
Yeah.
Other issues will surface because, where did we first learn what relationships look like? We learned it from our parents and caregivers. We learned it from significant adults in our lives. Where did we learn some of our values from? Well, a lot of it we have learned from the media, like it or not, and whether we realize that or not. I remember I grew up with some really warpy thoughts. I remember a guy kissing me when I was or a little boy kissing me when I was at primary school, and I spent months thinking that I would have to kill myself because I couldn't get married at that age. Kissing a boy at that age is really wrong. And if I can't get married, to kind of balance that out, I might as well die. Like, I don't even know where that came from, but we take things to the nth degree when we're neurodivergent, and it can have really dramatic consequences.
In terms of a successful romantic relationship, you'd say like a safe space to kind of work together as a team.
Yeah, a safe space to be, again, it's this idea of being alone together.
Yeah.
It is a huge compliment when someone who's neurodivergent wants to spend time with someone, because often we love our interior worlds. We have very rich inner worlds. We don't want for other people a lot of the time. This is why we can appear quite self-absorbed, because I think people on the outside feel sad sometimes that they can't have an effect on us, or they can't hang out with us, or they find it frustrating. And it can, when you're around someone who's super self-sufficient, it can give you the feeling of being really unneeded and unloved, but actually that's our egos, and we need to check in with that.
Yeah.
And then I think also be more open to interpretation, because neurodivergent people are far more likely to interpret relationships in a very different way to the norm. So, for example, a lot of couples will have their own bedrooms, and they'll literally have hookups in each other's bedrooms, but they'll have separate environments. A lot of people on the spectrum will have things like OCD, or they don't want their stuff being touched. They need an environment where they in one room of the building, of the house, of the flat, they control everything. There are people that need that. So if you have a couple's bedroom, I've never understood that concept. I used to live in Paris. The average couple in Paris live in something like 25, 30 meters squared.
Yeah,
you
that's
have a
crazy.
row. I mean, no wonder they're all having affairs, right? Because unless you're going to go and sleep in the shower. Yeah, exactly. Unless you're going to go and sleep in the shower or the sink. And that whole thing about getting pissed off with someone and turning your back to them and having that 8 hours of broken sleep where you hate them and they hate you. And like, I don't want that,
That's toxic.
Just go to your room. Yeah, it's toxic, but it's what most people are doing. And we need to give each other space, but not feel that means we don't love each other. That's not the same thing.
Again, it's just like taking a microscope to why we do the things we do. It's just the norm, but why? It's so fun to analyze why we do what we do. It's just because everyone else is doing it,
Yeah, we like to feel, and a lot of neurodivergent people, we've not met the same social milestones at the same times as other people in their lives, if we have met them at all. So for us, it's about saying, well, we've never really done stuff the way everyone else does it, so why should we try doing this the way everyone else does it?
I guess it's about finding someone that you can explore that with, and you can do it together, and you can find out what each other needs and what each other wants together as a team. And
absolutely,
that's just part of it.
I think totally. I think see it as a creative process. It is not prescribed.
And it could be fun, I suppose, in a way. Although it has its challenges, it can be fun to learn about another person and, learn to adapt your life to coexist, which is kind of what, it's what everyone has to do in a relationship.
I think that's completely true. I think just see it as you feel something in you. I mean, it took me a while to understand I wanted to meet someone, because I'm so good in my own skin. I couldn't work out, apart from the obvious, like there's, we can't sexually satisfy ourselves 100%, sadly. But apart from the obvious, like most of the things we can do alone, and we're pretty happy doing it. We don't, a lot of neurodivergent people, we don't really feel lonely. It's not been very often in my life, I could say, honestly, I felt lonely. I can go weeks without seeing people and I'm fine.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I don't love people deeply and I don't care about them. I just want to live parallel to them and look at them through double glazing. That's how I would rather exist. So I think see it as a creative process. And I think if you have a neurotypical partner, they would probably really appreciate challenging the status quo and being like, why do we have one bedroom? Why don't we make the other room a bed? Why don't we make the dining room, and we never use a bedroom or whatever? Yeah. Why don't we do stuff differently? Because
why not?
Otherwise you have the neurotypical person following convention if that's their thing. I'm not saying every neurotypical person is a slave to convention, but you've got the neurotypical person probably more likely to see the status quo, and you've got the neurodivergent person making themselves ill, literally, over the fact that they're trying to be something they're not.
Yeah.
When actually neurodivergent thinking can massively benefit everybody.
I love that. I'm learning so much, and I love this chat. So we briefly touched on sex and sexuality earlier. So when a new relationship becomes a sexual one for an autistic person, is approaching this very different to a neurotypical relationship, or is it quite similar? Can you tell me more about this?
I think this is where you need to get comfortable with asking questions. And it's a bit like using a condom. If you can't have the condom question, why are you going to bed with that person? And,
so true.
And it's the same. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, it's kind of pretty intimate what you're about to do, but you can't talk to them.
So true. It's like if they're not man enough to have that conversation, why are you having sex with them?
And there are men who will bring up that subject, and the woman might not find it romantic. But I'm sorry, but blind faith in a total stranger is not what you call romance.
We're adults.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's the same when it comes to approaching the subject of sex. There are lots of neurodivergent people who would not appreciate you going in for a hug. I have to say, I am a huggy person, and I naturally feel it's generous to approach someone that you have an affinity with and go in for a hug. And even I have to remind myself, there's a whole load of people that do not like that. It's come out of the blue for them. They weren't prepared with a reply. We also have this thing called rejection sensitive dysphoria, which I like to talk about when I do podcast interviews, because it's the dark side of ADHD and it's very dangerous. So 99% of people with ADHD have this thing called RSD. And if we experience or perceive rejection, and it might be overt rejection from a person, or it might be more of a sense of not belonging generally, which when you're in a minority is often the case. You don't feel like you belong anywhere.
Of course, yeah. You
can go from feeling perfectly fine and balanced to suicidal in the space of hours. And then you can feel literally like your insides of smashed glass.
That's hard.
It's physically painful. It's emotionally painful. You're then full of shame that you even if this happens behind closed doors and no one can see, you're then full of shame, which can last like the week. It's a long process getting yourself back from an RSD, attack, as I would call it. So imagine you're neurodivergent, you hate being touched, or at least you need some warning. Someone goes in for a hug, you freeze, you go nonverbal because you don't know what to communicate. You feel like you might sound weird. You feel the person might not respect you or look at you in that way that says, okay, you're a bit odd. Just that look alone is enough to send you plummeting.
Oh God, yeah. It's so hard.
Like the consequences could be pretty serious, Yeah. Whenever I've had an RSD attack, I had one in September, which was after the most beautiful wedding you could imagine. Like if there was a point where you would never have felt that someone could feel from 0 to 60 and suicidal, it would be after a beautiful wedding.
I'm sorry that happened.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, RSD is a bitch. It is, for everyone that says, oh, you're so ADHD, what they mean by that is you're a bit of a squirrel brain and a bit creative and a bit quirky. And that's wonderful. I love all that stuff. When you learn to harness it, the proverbial superpower is a thing if you can harness it. If not, it is super destructive, and RSD is a bitch. Like that is certain. So to bring up the subject of sex, then I think that with autism being a social and communication developmental condition, as opposed to a mental health condition, which is what most people think of it as, it is very important to talk about sex because sex is very sensory. It is very impacted by social and communication abilities. So just talk it out. Just say, what do you enjoy? What do you not enjoy? Do you even know? There are many, many people that because of their social and communication difficulties, they might be in their late 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s. They may not have had a relationship. They may have not had sex. You know, they may have lost their virginity much later than the norm.
Yeah.
So just be open-minded again. I think a lot of it is just ask the right questions. Trust the person that if they say something isn't comfortable, it doesn't matter what they look like, it isn't comfortable. Don't assume the worst and just get to know them.
You mentioned something as well about a lot of the assumptions that autistic children's parents have about them in terms of their sexuality, and maybe parents assuming that their children are asexual, and how dehumanizing this can be, and how this can affect their access to sex education. Can you tell me more about this? I found this really interesting and really sad, to be honest. And I think it's something that a lot of people need to hear.
Yeah, of course. So there is a wonderful woman over in Australia called Heather Morrison, who runs a company which was formerly known as Handy, and it has now changed names. She is in the sex tech industry. She's fighting for she's a social entrepreneur, and she is fighting for the recognition of the sexual needs of people with various disabilities, mostly physical, in her company at the moment. But all of that to say, the reason Heather is doing such an amazing job and so many people are behind her is because we live in a climate where if you're disabled in any way, you're not considered sexy or sexually active. This is why young people who have a condition are not being taught about sex, because it's assumed they won't be having any. This is why parents are assuming. So the reason I know this up close and personal is because I do work alongside. So I wrote and deliver the training for an organization called the Kimmel Foundation down in Wokingham in Berkshire, where we take young people from 16 to 30. We give them personal development and then employability, because people need to know about themselves before they can even consider themselves ready for work, because it is not all about CVs and application forms.
Yep.
I go through everything with them, and that includes puberty. I then see referrals from people who don't know what to do with someone, and they say, well, we've tried social workers, we've tried support workers, we've tried counselling through our system, the NHS, the publicly funded system. It is all mental health based. So 20% of our stuff is seen because it's not, in essence, a mental health condition. So 80% of us goes unseen.
Wow.
So there's a lot of misunderstandings, and that is not sexy. We're seen as problematic, complex. We're seen as not needing people. We're seen as unconfident. We're seen as antisocial. Why would those people be having sex? Okay. And it's just not true. So I know of this again because I'm running a smear test project in Gloucestershire, whereby we've got 5 local doctors' surgeries making smear tests or pap tests more accessible to people who are neurodivergent.
Incredible. That's an amazing initiative. You have so many side projects going on. It's amazing.
Well, you know what? I'm 43, so you take everything that has ever pissed you off and turn it into a strand of your business, and you have a busy business.
Oh my God. This is great advice.
I think it's a great way to run a business. I had an autism advocate who took me to my smear or my pap test a couple of years ago. I actually had my first one when I hit 40, which is super dangerous. Yeah, it's super dangerous, and I don't advocate that, but I'm honest about it because I could really have missed the signs of cervical cancer. They would not have been picked up because I wasn't being looked at. And actually, what we did is we interviewed people about their smear tests, and we said, have you had one? Do you know what they're for? Why would you not go? Why does it bother you or not? And people had really preconceived ideas about what a smear test is. Personally, I dissociate. I have bitten doctors. I've kicked doctors. I've screamed. I've screamed a hospital down before because I was constipated, because I'm so sensitive to pain. So I had an autism advocate come with me, and she literally talked to me about stuff that she knows I care about because she had done some support work with me, and she kept me grounded. And it wasn't the same as just having a chaperone. She got it. She just got it. And I felt human. I felt womanly. I didn't feel infantilized. The doctor was amazed, actually, at what a difference it made. Wow, I think they were amazed to see someone who's together and confident and presents as not being autistic, whatever that means, as screaming the place down because I couldn't stand the idea. I mean, you know, I'm completely comfortable with sex and everything, but to have a pap test is just like literally like someone sticking their fingers down my throat. I just have a gag reflex.
Well, she sounds like an amazing woman, the woman who took you.
Oh, she is amazing. And I really think that we need to roll health advocacy out nationally, because we need bridge builders between GPs who tend to be, by nature of the length and cost of their training and backgrounds, you know, middle class, upper middle class. Then you've got them talking to people who are, they're in the medical model as well, whereas neurodiversity is born of the social model of disability. They speak a completely different language. I have very often sat in doctor's surgeries translating for a sort of, I don't want to be cliched, but I think you'll find the stats of working class GPs pretty low. And literally translating between two native English speakers who just don't get each other in terms of the way they're looking at medicine, the way that people remember the diagnoses, the way they need to hear the diagnoses, the sorts of meds which are recommended. There's a complete disconnect. And there's a lot of neurodivergent women and neurodivergent people in general who are not seeing the doctor. When you think most of us have some sort of trauma that needs looking at, that's really worrying, because then you can't get referrals for things like EMDR because you're not talking to anyone about the trauma.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then they're not trained in trauma, so they're making people repeat stuff, which is the worst thing you can do.
Absolutely, yeah.
So basically, when we were researching the pap test, I say pap test because I'm aware that's the American word, and here in the UK we say smear test. But we interviewed people, and we had people saying, you know, some people live at home and their parents were around or whatever, because, you know, when you have a disability, you lose the right to confidentiality, of course. I've seen people yelled at across a whole line of people waiting to get onto a plane, you know, why are you getting on first? Oh, she's autistic. Oh, okay, she's autistic.
Oh, God.
I think, Jesus Christ. And, you know, she's 7 years old. That's all she's hearing about herself from perfect strangers. And so people would say things like, why are you asking my daughter about smear tests? Like, obviously, she's not going to need one.
Yeah.
And it's really worrying and really naive and a total infringement on that person's sort of civil liberties, because they're probably thinking, well, do you mind? I'm 23 and I was quite looking forward to a life of being sexually active. Thanks.
Yeah. God. And how do we combat that? Do you think it's just education or better education for the parents of autistic children, or what's the best way that we can sort of combat that?
The best way is that we have a real understanding in society, and this is why Heather Morrison of the formerly known as Handy Company, with their first ever disabled-led sex toy, that's just come out on the market. Wow. This is why we need, sex tech is a big deal at the moment, and we need more entrepreneurs who talk about the fact that disabled people with conditions, have sex lives. It's super important. I know a lot of people who are interested in going into that space, and I hope that in the next 10 years that becomes a huge thing, because how dare we take, you know, earlier I referred to sexual energy as our life force. How dare we take that away from people 100%. Because they have a health condition.
God, that is so interesting. And you mentioned to me prior to the podcast that you yourself are bisexual. So how does exploring one's sexuality differ for neurodivergent people, and what was your experiences with this?
I have related to being bisexual since I was 3.
Okay.
And I've always been very comfortable with it. I have at various points had relationships with either sex and thought maybe I should just say I'm lesbian, maybe I should just say I'm straight. That is not the point. We don't, you know, it's always about binaries, isn't it? We live in a society, you've got to be one thing or the other. You can't be, as we see it, both, which is ridiculous. We're just being ourselves is the difference. So I think that being neurodivergent, I've always been super relaxed about being bisexual in a way that might be disarming if you come from a background where you do see only binaries, or you maybe have some sort of religious input in your education. And, you know, family attitudes are important. But if I'm honest with you, I call myself bisexual. I would say I'm probably pansexual, but then at the same time, I'm actually actively looking to date men.
Okay.
I have dated women. I'm in a period of my life now, but I still can't honestly call myself straight, far from it. I mean, if I walk down the street, I'm going to find 7 out of 10 women attractive and probably 3 out of 10 men. It might sound strange, therefore, that I would date guys more than girls, but I'm exclusively looking to date guys because you know why? Because I think that men and women are mixed of masculine and feminine energies, and I like that when I'm with a guy, it brings out a lot of my feminine energy, which balances my natural masculine energy. I don't know what lesbians out there will make of me saying that. I don't know if that's something that is a no-no to say, but hell, it's my sexuality. I'll say what I want.
Yeah, it's how you feel. And that's the thing. It's so different and so unique for everyone. So
it is.
So in terms of exploring your sexuality as an autistic person, how did you think this differed from neurotypical people?
I think that it's hard for everyone. And I know that I'm giving an interview about being neurodivergent, working with neurodivergence, and that is only 16% of the population, which is a sizable minority. But I'm aware that it can sound like only we have problems, only we have complex lives. And I don't mean it that way. But let's be clear, dating is a minefield for everybody.
So
especially
true.
Yeah, I mean, it is hard. We all have insecurities that are brought up by getting close to someone. We all hate rejection. We all have difficulties showing up and believing in ourselves. But for a neurodivergent person, I think that the difference is that we live in a society that is already built for neurotypicals, built by a lot of the time neurotypicals. What we have to remember as well, I haven't mentioned yet, is that neurodivergent people very often either don't know they're neurodivergent or they will be self-diagnosed, because diagnoses of autism and ADHD are known as diagnoses of privilege. If you are from a working class background and you are basically relying on the NHS because it's, 1,500 quid to go and get a diagnosis, and otherwise you've got to wait 2 years or so to probably be told if you're a woman that you might not be neurodivergent, because the criteria are very weighted towards young boys. You can see why a lot of us go hidden. A lot of us are late diagnosed. I only got my autism diagnosis at 38. I'm now 43.
Wow.
And yet my first ever client was 9 years ago, and they were trying to kill themselves by throwing themselves off the roof of a mental health institution. And we both said that very day, you are neurodivergent. And then they messaged me 5-6 years later and said, I've just been told I'm neurodivergent. And I was like, you knew this?
Yeah. Oh my God.
It's, quite horrific. So imagine what that does to people. They've been through education. They've already been weirdos at home. They've been weirdos at school. They've been made redundant, in inverted commas, or fired various times through their employment, or they've not got employment at all. They've been isolated. They've had divorces. They've had abuse. They've more than likely had some sort of domestic abuse, eating disorders. They've more than likely had trauma, PTSD diagnoses. Often been told they have bipolar or emotionally unstable personality disorder. You put that together and then tell someone at the age of 53, actually it was autism.
Yeah.
What the hell do you do then?
Yeah. And I guess it's sort of like exploring your sexuality. I mean, as you said, it's a minefield for everyone, but going through all of those things at the same time, like, I can't imagine how difficult and how challenging that is.
This is the thing, because through the dating process, what are you doing? You're telling someone about yourself. You're telling someone who you are, what you stand for, what you want. How can you know any of those things with the great litany of stuff that I've just come out with? How can you know? Do you know what I mean? If you're dating, start with who you are and what do you want. Well, I would say find me somebody who knows that.
Yeah, and it's all based on labels as well, isn't it? So if you don't have a label for all those things you're feeling, how can you possibly articulate that to somebody, especially if it's somebody for bloody dating app or somebody that you don't even know, whereas you probably struggle to articulate it to the people that are closest to you.
Massively. People closest to you will generally take it for granted they know you better than anyone. They knew you before labels. They knew you as you really are.
Yeah.
That has pluses and minuses. There's a bit of entitlement that comes with knowing someone and being familiar with them, in the sense that we tend to overlook glaringly obvious things that maybe their friends are more likely to see because they'll see them objectively, firstly, or more objectively. And they'll see them outside the home where we're not regressing into our family roles. So yeah, there's lots of things weighted against us. There's this very, you know how you go to the fun fair, you get the hall of mirrors and everything's a bit warpy and weird and you don't quite know if you're on solid ground. Like, that is what it's like.
Yeah.
So communicating clearly who you are and what you want is made virtually impossible. And that's why we need patience and we need people to take time to get to know us, because we are hard to get to know, but my goodness, it pays off in spades.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And speaking of communication, so I just want to quickly chat about support. So what is your advice for how people can better learn about and use communication strategies for autistic people?
Communication is one of the favorite areas I work in my coaching and therapy, because we're very complicated, as I've said, and communicating that to the outside world, it does feel like you have to recruit your own special envoy to work between your head and decode you for the rest of the world. It is exhausting, but self-advocacy is kind of like our health insurance policy. So I do a lot with people where we literally brainstorm. I do believe I'm one of those really annoying sunny Pollyanna type people that believes they can brainstorm the way out of everything. But if you take something that is stressing you out, don't tell yourself, it's easy, why can't I do this? The definition of something that's easy is something you find easy. If you're having to beat yourself up and tell yourself something's easy, why can't I do this? Clearly there's something not going right.
Yeah, it's not easy if it's not easy.
It is not easy if it's not easy. And this is where we've internalized a huge amount of ableism and also homogeneity. There's nothing to say something is easy or that it's hard. And there's nothing to say we should find something easy because the next person does. If you come across something, whatever it is, I get people say to me, Sarah, I just got this email from a guy and I don't know how to reply. I don't know what they mean, because a lot of us have context blindness. I will shut down if I don't understand what someone means by something, but I don't want to be seen as, you know how sometimes we get accused of, oh, you're always raking over stuff, or why can't you just leave it? Why can't you just move on?
Yeah, overthinking.
Well, I can't process it because oh my goodness, I hate that. Somehow it's okay to call someone an overthinker, but to say to say to someone they're shallow and underwhelming is really offensive. And I have never understood this. Like, how is it okay to say to someone you're an overthinker when you can't say the opposite? It's just so weird to me.
Oh my God, that is so true. They're literally direct opposite. You can say you're an overthinker, but if you're shallow, then that's like completely wrong. Maybe it's
how rude would that be?
Yeah. Oh my God, that is so true. I think something that has come out for me in this podcast and something that I've learned, and I think it's really helped that you have been just so open and so honest throughout the whole podcast, is just asking the questions. And that is the main thing about communication. If you don't know, then just ask. That is just what has really come out for me through this podcast.
Yeah, and I think, as you said earlier, that's true of everybody, because, you know, we all put a face on. We don't mean to, and thank goodness we do. Otherwise, we'd all be having panic attacks and screaming at each other day long. Like, I'm often surprised with the amount of insecurities we all have, that we all manage to get out of bed and function every day.
That's
and
so
some of us don't at certain periods of our lives, you know.
Yeah.
But we have to have a front. We have to have ego to survive social life. But yeah, there also has to be a limit at times. But we have to ask questions. When you're a therapist, one of the biggest things that you can learn to do is ask the right questions and challenge the right things and listen to what's not being said. I must admit, I'm not as good at doing that in my personal life as I am as a therapist.
And it's easy to do it through a non-subjective lens, like an objective lens. You can always help your friends with their problems, but when it comes to your own life, I feel like it's hard to look inward sometimes.
It's very true. And neurodivergent people have this thing where we can do things for other people. We can't do things for ourselves. We can feed a family, but we won't eat. We can fill a form out for someone else, but we can't fill the form out.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So I've mentioned a lot on the sensory side of things, but executive function, which includes emotional regulation, is a big thing for us. It involves things like our working memory, our task initiation, our follow through, our completion. It involves how we organize ourselves, how we regulate our emotions is another minefield. So if you combine executive function, sensory stuff, and emotional regulation, plus the fact that we also have mental health issues, because of not knowing who the hell we are and being rejected so much, it's a lot to cope with. You know, when you're neurodivergent, you're often incredibly patient, incredibly resourceful. It's ironic that people with long-term health conditions are often seen as the sick one of the family, the black sheep, the patient, the weak one, the one that brings everyone down. But that can often be, if you look at things like family therapy, that can often be a scapegoating mechanism so that other members of the family and other dynamics get ignored and brushed over, because the convenient sick one or neurodivergent or different one is the troublemaker.
It's a deflection of other issues that are going on in that family.
It is a very convenient deflection. Yeah. And then the person grows up thinking that they're the patient, the sick one, the weak one in society. If they're then on welfare or benefits, as we call it here, it's a further impacting sign that you're the weak one, the sick one. And actually, ironically, we are often the resourceful one, the patient one, the diplomatic one, the one that really cares about people but isn't fake. The one that won't just pay lip service to people but will give a compliment because we mean it. Like, there's a lot of genuineness, there's a lot of depth.
And probably a lot of support that's coming through that people may not shine a light on in situations, because, as you said, it's an easy scapegoat to sort of pass the blame on, when really it could be more. You could be more of a support network in that family than people realize.
Absolutely, you can be seen as an adult because you know. Sometimes I say to clients, it's funny how your family see you as the sick one and the weak one, but you're the one that does the childcare. You seem to be the family counsellor. You're the one that's lent everyone money that you've saved over the years. You know, you're the one that has you know, done all these amazing things that you minimize because you're the weak one, and it really does give a different light and slant on people. And then I learned over the pandemic that I can pour all of that stuff into having a business, and that's a far better far more fruitful avenue.
What did you say? Things that piss you off, you've got to like lean into them and make them
and turn
fruitful.
them into a business.
God, there's such great advice. So my final question is, just for everyone listening, what are the best resources for people to learn about neurodivergent relationships? Obviously, apart from your business Wired Differently, which I will link in the bio, are there any other resources that you can suggest? And I'll link all of this in the episode show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that being online is really valuable. I know a lot of people who are neurodivergent, or they're therapists who are seeing neurodivergent people and likely neurodivergent themselves. They get a lot out of TikTok. They get a lot out of Instagram, YouTube videos, TED Talks. I'm a real fan of Scribed, which is about £10 a month, and you get it's like a Kindle Unlimited for people who are really geeky about personal development, psychology, and business, which is ideal. Yeah, I love Scribed. And I have a community of followers on LinkedIn, which I love. I mean, literally, I can be really like tired and not wanting to think about work and just being in my thing and maybe having a meltdown and, you know, just chilling out, having a meltdown. And I will actually turn LinkedIn on because I feel healthy and accepted and like life is okay again, because the diversity, equity, inclusion community on there and the neurodiversity community on there is just wonderful. It's super exciting. If you want to see when neurodiversity is going, it's great to be on LinkedIn right now. Yeah.
Amazing.
And, you know, neurodivergent people, we love online resources. It's a good job because there's absolutely sod all else out there for us. So I think that's probably a good thing. And yeah, find your tribe, find your role models, because role models show you stuff's possible. That gives you hope. That lifts mental health issues. We definitely need a lot more role modeling going on. We need to just be honest. Sometimes I get a bit riled by so-called authenticity on social media because it's another layer of fakeness, but you know, we're all trying desperately to be authentic and also protect our egos. I get that. We're all doing it.
It's more deflection, isn't it?
It is more deflection. And I think also, you know, the great thing about being neurodivergent is technically you can always be an expert, because I think Malcolm Gladwell says 100,000 hours in a subject technically makes you an expert. And we are the world's best researchers. I mean, last night, my brain would not let me sleep until I'd done 4 hours research on the niche perfume business.
Wow. Is that your next business?
I need to know. That's That is literally, honestly, reading about indie perfume creators. Like, I literally was awake until 2:00 this morning I think I started researching that at 9:00 last night and did not look up. Yeah, so we're really good researchers. So thank God, because research helps us self-advocate. I think also there's a lot of neurodiversity coaches out there now. I would definitely choose one who is neurodivergent. A little bit like, I like to go to a doctor that tells me about their mental health issues. I like to go to a therapist that tells me they went into it because of stuff they'd had. I like that. I'm somebody who will have a meltdown and post about it and then get people say, actually, could you be my coach? If I was working with neurotypicals, they'd be like, oh my God, who is this unstable woman? There's no way I want her to be my coach. But that's how neurodivergents think. We like real, and we like people who get us. And that does not, unfortunately, come from a textbook.
Oh, Sara, this has been incredible. And I think you are such a fantastic role model for autistic people. And I hope that there is people out there listening to this that are going to feel inspired. And if you do want to reach out, feel free to reach out to me. I will put links to Wired Differently in the show notes as well. So if you want to go and read more, you can do so there. But thank you so much for coming on and chatting about all of this with me. It's been so much fun and so interesting.
Thank you. I'm very lucky that I can think about things like this on difficult days, whereas a lot of people, if they're in a job that's not to do with neurodiversity, they can't do that. And I like to speak on their behalf to an extent, but I would like a lot more people to have a voice. So I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed my chat with the gorgeous Sara. Please let me know on my Instagram. It's at madsworld.mp3 or on my website, madsworld.co, if you have any stories or thoughts or opinions of your own to share. Love and elbow taps. Peace.